Cowboy guarded Apache through the night storm, and the song Apache sang exposed a hidden bond. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Jake Thompson had lived a solitary life for as long as he could remember. As a cowboy, he had always kept to himself, working his ranch in isolation. The vast plains of the West were his only companions, and the silence was his solace. But all of that was about to change. On this particular night, a fierce storm had swept through the region. The winds howled like a wild animal, and the rain came down in sheets, soaking everything in its path. Jake had retreated to his small cabin, trying to ride out the storm, but something outside caught his attention. Through the torrential downpour, he saw a figure struggling against the storm. A woman. She was barely visible, her form almost swallowed by the dark night. But there was no mistaking the urgency in her movements. Without thinking, Jake grabbed his coat and rushed outside. The wind almost knocked him off his feet, but he pushed through, following the faint silhouette of the woman. As he reached her, he could see that she was barely holding on, her body battered by the storm, her face pale and exhausted. She was a stranger, but Jake had no time to question her. He took her into his arms, guiding her toward the shelter of his cabin. The storm raged on outside, but inside the warmth of the fire, the woman began to come to life. She was shivering, her clothes soaked through, but she seemed grateful for the safety. As Jake helped her settle near the fire, he couldn't help but notice her eyes. They were dark and intense, filled with a story he couldn't quite read. She was Apache. It was clear from the way she carried herself, the strength in her movements, the quiet dignity that surrounded her. Despite the storm and her exhaustion, she didn't seem afraid. She sat there, in the dim light of the cabin, as if waiting for something, or someone. Jake, though used to his solitude, felt a strange pull towards her. He had heard stories of the Apache, of their fierce warriors and their rich culture, but he had never met one in person. This woman, however, was different. Her presence stirred something in him, something that he hadn't felt in years. They didn't speak much at first. Words seemed unnecessary in the presence of the storm, the fire, and the silence. But eventually, the woman spoke, her voice soft yet steady. She introduced herself as Ayanna, and with her words, Jake felt a deep connection, an unspoken bond that seemed to transcend the circumstances that brought them together. As the hours passed, the storm outside began to die down. But it wasn't just the storm that had calmed. Inside the cabin, an invisible barrier between them had started to melt away. Ayanna's gaze lingered on Jake, and in that moment, he understood that something had shifted. As the night wore on, Ayanna began to sing. The song she sang was unfamiliar to Jake, a haunting melody that echoed in the cabin. The words were foreign to him, but the emotion behind them was clear. It was a song of longing, of memory, of something ancient and powerful. Jake felt a lump rise in his throat as he listened. The song seemed to speak to him, to touch something deep inside him. It was as if Ayanna had opened a door to a part of his soul he didn't know existed. In that moment, he realized that their meeting wasn't just by chance. There was something more. The song revealed a hidden bond between them, a connection that neither of them could explain, but both could feel. Jake didn't understand it fully, but he knew that it was real. The storm outside had passed, but inside, something had changed. Ayanna had come into his life in the most unexpected of ways, and her song had sealed the bond that would tie them together forever. As the morning light slowly crept through the cracks in the wooden cabin, Jake Thompson sat by the fire, his gaze fixed on the still figure of Ayanna. She had fallen asleep by the hearth, her face peaceful, yet there was an undeniable tension in the air between them. He couldn't shake the feeling that their meeting was no mere coincidence. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered in his heart. He had never been one to question fate, But something about Ayana made him wonder if their paths had crossed for a reason. She had come into his life like a storm, uninvited and fierce, but now, in the calm, he couldn't help but feel drawn to her. Her presence, her song, the connection he felt when she sang, it all felt too real to be ignored. Jake had seen many things in his life, but nothing had touched him like Ayana's song. It was as if the world itself had momentarily stopped, and for a fleeting moment, he understood her in a way he could not explain. As the sun rose higher, casting warm golden light over the cabin, Ayana stirred. She opened her eyes, and for a brief moment, their gazes locked. There was a quiet understanding between them, a wordless acknowledgement of the night they had shared. Ayana stretched slightly, and then, without saying a word, she stood and walked toward the door. Jake hesitated, unsure of what to do next. The previous night had left him with more questions than answers. Who was she really? What did she want from him? But before he could voice any of these thoughts, Ayana spoke softly, her voice carrying a sense of calm authority. "Thank you," she said simply, her eyes meeting his once more. "You saved me." Jake nodded, unsure of what else to say. The words felt insufficient compared to what had transpired between them. He had helped her, yes, but it was something more. Something deeper than just a man helping a woman in need. Ayana turned and walked out into the bright morning light, the air fresh after the storm. Jake followed her outside, where the landscape was quiet, almost serene, after the chaos of the night. The sky was clear now, with only a few clouds lingering in the distance. The winds had died down, and the only sound was the rustling of the trees and the distant call of a bird. Jake had lived in these parts for years, but he had never seen the land look so peaceful. Ayana stood near the edge of the property, her back to him, looking out over the vast open space. "What now?" Jake asked, his voice low but steady. Ayana turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "Now we part ways," she said, her voice tinged with both sadness and resolve. "You helped me, but I cannot stay." Jake felt a pang of disappointment. He had known this moment was coming, but it still hurt to hear it out loud. "Where will you go?" he asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. Ayana's eyes softened, and she looked out toward the horizon. "I have my people," she said. "My tribe." Jake nodded, understanding that there was a world beyond his small cabin, a world he would never fully understand. He had been isolated for so long that the thought of belonging to a group, to a community, seemed foreign to him. "Take care, Ayana," he said quietly. "And if you ever need help again, don't hesitate to come back." Ayana smiled faintly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I will remember that," she said before turning and walking away. Jake watched her go, his heart heavy. He had helped her, yes, but it felt as though there was something left unfinished between them. A bond, perhaps, that neither of them fully understood yet. As Ayana disappeared into the distance, Jake stood there for a long while, staring at the spot where she had been. The world seemed quieter now, but there was a sense of peace in the silence. The storm had passed, but a new kind of storm had begun to stir within him, a storm of emotions he couldn't quite name. He had saved her, but in return, she had given him something far greater, a glimpse into a world he had long forgotten and a connection that would stay with him long after she was gone. Weeks passed since Ayana's departure, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling of her presence lingering in his life. Every day, he worked the land, fixing fences and tending to his cattle, but his thoughts often drifted back to her. The way she looked at him with those intense, knowing eyes, the way her song had touched something deep within him. It wasn't just the storm that had changed him, but the quiet bond that had formed between them in such a short time. He found himself staring out over the wide, open plains, hoping for something, anything, to break the silence. Then, one day, as the sun began to dip low on the horizon, Jake heard the sound of hooves approaching. At first, he thought it might be a traveler, but as the figures grew closer, his heart skipped a beat. There, riding toward him across the open field, were two Apache warriors. His mind raced, unsure of what to expect, but he stood firm, his boots planted in the dry earth. The two riders approached slowly, their horses' hooves thudding softly against the ground. The lead rider, a tall man with a face marked by war paint, stopped just a few feet away from Jake. "Jake Thompson?" the man asked in a voice deep with authority. Jake nodded cautiously. "That's me." The warrior dismounted with a fluid motion, his eyes never leaving Jake. "We come on behalf of the Redstone Apache tribe," he said, his voice steady but laced with a certain heaviness. Jake's heart raced. He had known this day might come, but he hadn't expected it to feel like this. "What do you want with me?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The warrior held up a small leather pouch, the same kind of pouch Ayanna had carried when they met. "We bring you a message from Ayanna," he said, his tone serious. Jake's pulse quickened. He hadn't seen or heard from her since the storm, and now here they were, standing in front of him, bringing her name back into his life. "Ayanna?" Jake repeated, almost in disbelief. The warrior nodded. "She sent us. She knew you helped her. And now she asks for your help once again." The second rider remained silent, his eyes scanning the horizon, alert. Jake's mind raced as he tried to process everything. The last time he had seen Ayanna, she had left, promising that their paths would diverge, that they would return to their separate lives. But now, here they were, and Ayanna needed him. "What does she need?" Jake asked, his voice quieter now, his resolve firming. The lead warrior lowered the pouch and handed it to Jake. "She's in danger. We need your help to protect the tribe. The white man has begun encroaching on our lands, and there are those who wish to see our people erased. Ayanna believes you can help us." Jake took the pouch, feeling its weight in his hands. He hadn't planned for this, but he couldn't turn his back now. He remembered the way Ayanna had looked at him before she left, how her trust in him had felt like a promise. "I'll help," Jake said, his voice steady. "I'll do whatever I can." The warrior nodded, as if he had expected this response. "Then follow us," he said. "We ride at dawn." That night, Jake didn't sleep. He sat by the fire, staring into the flickering flames, thinking of Ayanna, of the bond they shared, and the life he had known before she came into it. He had been alone for so long, but now, in the quiet moments before the dawn, he realized something had changed. Ayanna had given him a purpose, a reason to leave the comfort of his solitary existence. The next morning, Jake mounted his horse and rode with the two Apache warriors. As they rode out into the unknown, he couldn't help but feel that his journey was just beginning. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Ayanna had trusted him, and he wasn't about to let her down. With every mile they rode, Jake's heart grew heavier, knowing that he was heading into a battle he had never expected, one that would not only test his courage but also the connection he shared with the woman who had unknowingly changed his life. As the days passed, Jake Thompson's journey into the heart of Apache territory felt both exhilarating and unnerving. His once solitary life was now intertwined with a cause he never imagined he would be a part of. The two Apache warriors, who introduced themselves as Dakota and Waya, led him through rugged terrain, their horses moving with practiced ease. The landscape was vast and open, with rolling hills and sparse trees, but Jake felt a heaviness in the air. It was as though the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. By the time they reached the Apache camp, the sun was beginning to set. The camp was tucked away in a secluded valley, surrounded by rocky cliffs that created a natural barrier. It was a place that felt both timeless and alive, with the faint scent of cedar and sage in the air. Fires crackled in the distance, and Jake could hear the sounds of conversation in a language he did not understand. As he dismounted and looked around, he noticed that the camp was larger than he had anticipated. It wasn't just a small group of warriors, but a full-fledged tribe, with men, women, and children going about their daily lives. There was a sense of harmony here, a unity that Jake had never experienced before. Ayanna was nowhere in sight, but Jake felt a strange pull, an invisible connection that guided him through the camp. Dakota and Waya led him to a fire where a group of elders sat. They looked up as he approached, their faces etched with wisdom and experience. The air was thick with the weight of unspoken words. "Jake Thompson," Dakota said, introducing him in a way that made it clear Jake was not just a guest but someone of importance now. "This is the man who helped Ayanna. He has come to help us." The elders nodded, their eyes studying Jake carefully. One of the women, an older figure with sharp features and a gaze that seemed to pierce through the very soul, spoke first. "You have already given us your aid, Cowboy," she said, her voice soft yet commanding. "But you do not know what you have come here to face." Jake nodded, though he had no idea what he was truly up against. The warriors had said little to him during the ride, only that there was danger. But now, sitting before the elders of the Apache tribe, the weight of the situation was becoming clearer. "What must I do?" Jake asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty inside him. The elder woman looked at him with a mixture of respect and sadness. "You will help us protect our land," she said. "The white man is coming for us, and they will stop at nothing to take what is ours. We must stand together, or we will lose everything." Jake felt a tightness in his chest as the reality of the situation hit him. He had come here to help, but now he was being asked to fight for a cause far greater than anything he had ever imagined. "I'll do what I can," he said, his words firm, though the doubt still lingered in his mind. The elders exchanged looks, then nodded. "We are grateful for your help, Jake Thompson," the elder woman said. "But you must understand that this is not just a battle of bodies. It is a battle for our way of life, our future. It is a battle that will test not just your strength, but your heart." Jake's gaze shifted to the distant hills, where the setting sun cast long shadows across the land. He had always thought of himself as a man of simple needs, his ranch, his cattle, his peace. But now, standing in this camp, surrounded by the people he had once only heard of in stories, he felt the weight of something much larger than himself. This was no longer about a cowboy helping a woman in need. This was about standing up for what was right, for something that went beyond race or history. It was about belonging to something greater, something that connected him to this land in a way he had never understood before. As the night fell and the stars began to twinkle above, Jake sat by the fire, his mind racing with the enormity of what lay ahead. He could no longer turn back. He had a new purpose now, and with it, a responsibility he could not ignore. Ayanna had come into his life like a storm, and now, he realized, he was part of that storm. Whatever the future held, he would face it alongside the Apache people. And perhaps, in the process, he would discover a part of himself he had long forgotten. The following days in the Apache camp were a blur of preparations. Jake Thompson found himself learning more about the tribe than he ever expected. Dakota and Waya showed him how they had lived in harmony with the land for generations, their connection to nature, and the traditions that shaped their lives. The more Jake learned, the more he realized how different their world was from his own. But there was also a shared understanding, a bond that went beyond words. The tribe had been living in peace for years, but with the increasing pressure from settlers and government forces, their way of life was being threatened. Jake could see it in their eyes, the quiet determination that masked the fear of losing everything they held dear. Ayanna, though, seemed different. She had always been a warrior at heart, and even now, after everything that had happened, she was still fighting, not just for her people but for the future they could still build together. One morning, after a week of helping prepare for whatever was to come, Jake stood at the edge of the camp, watching the sun rise over the mountains. It was a peaceful moment, the kind he had longed for in his solitary life, but there was something in the air now, something urgent. Ayanna appeared beside him, her presence calm but firm. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her gaze sweeping across the camp, then out toward the horizon. "Do you ever wonder what it's all for?" Jake asked after a moment, his voice soft. Ayanna turned to him, her dark eyes meeting his with an intensity that he had come to recognize. "We fight because we have no choice," she said simply. "If we don't, everything will be lost. Our land, our people, our way of life." Jake nodded, understanding her words, but still feeling the weight of the situation. He had been thrust into this battle without ever seeking it. But now, He could not imagine turning away. "I never thought I'd be part of something like this," he said quietly. "But I can't just walk away now." Ayana smiled, the expression almost sad but filled with understanding. "That's why you're here," she said. "You didn't come for glory or fame. You came because you knew what was right." Jake didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked out over the land, the wide open spaces that seemed endless. It was hard to believe that something so beautiful could be at the center of such a fierce struggle. But that was the reality now. The storm wasn't just a metaphor, it was real, and it was coming. That afternoon, the tribe gathered to discuss their plans. Jake sat among the elders, listening intently to their words. It was clear that the situation was more dire than he had realized. The settlers were getting closer, and with them came the threat of violence. The tribe had to act fast if they were to have any chance of surviving. "Jake," Pakoda said, his voice low but serious. "We need your help. You know the land. You've lived here long enough to understand its rhythms. You can help us defend it." Jake didn't hesitate. He had never been a warrior, but he had always been a protector. And now, more than ever, he knew that he couldn't stand idly by. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said firmly. As the meeting continued, Jake felt a sense of purpose settle over him. This wasn't just about Ayana anymore. It was about something much larger, the survival of a way of life that had existed for centuries. The next few days were a blur of training and preparation. Jake learned how to fight alongside the warriors, how to use the land to his advantage, and how to move as one with the Apache people. The more time he spent with them, the more he realized that his bond with Ayana wasn't just about her. It was about their shared connection to the land, to the spirit of survival, and to the hope that they could protect what they loved. On the morning of the final confrontation, Jake stood at the edge of the camp, his heart pounding in his chest. The warriors were preparing for battle, their faces set in grim determination. Ayana was among them, her posture fierce and proud. Jake felt a surge of admiration for her, but there was also a deep sense of fear. This wasn't a fight he had ever imagined himself in, but now it was his reality. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Jake knew that this was it. The moment they had all been waiting for had arrived. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore, he was fighting for something that had become much more important, the future. The morning of the battle had arrived. Jake Thompson stood at the edge of the Apache camp, his heart racing as the warriors prepared for the inevitable. The sun was barely visible above the horizon, casting a soft glow over the land. The quiet before the storm was almost unnerving. Around him, the Apache warriors moved with silent precision, gathering their weapons, preparing the land for the fight that would decide their fate. Jake had never been part of something so significant before. The adrenaline surged through him as he glanced over at Ayana. She was standing near the fire, her face calm but resolute, a silent leader among the tribe. Despite the tension in the air, she appeared at peace with the decision they had made to defend their land. Jake felt a mix of fear and respect for her strength. He had seen her courage during the past weeks, but now, as they stood on the precipice of battle, he saw something deeper, a connection to the land and her people that went beyond the fight itself. He could feel that same connection, though it was still new to him. Ayana's eyes met his for a brief moment, and there was no need for words. She knew what they had to do. She had known it all along. Jake nodded and turned to the warriors around him. He had trained alongside them, learning their ways, their movements. The tribe had shown him their strength, their wisdom. Now, he was ready to stand with them. As the warriors mounted their horses and prepared to ride out, Jake felt his heartbeat steady. This wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't even just about Ayana. This was about the future. The future of the Apache people, the future of the land they had fought to protect for generations. Jake wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was one of them. The group set off, riding toward the distant hills where the settlers had begun to gather. The air was thick with anticipation. The ride was long and silent, broken only by the sound of hooves pounding the earth beneath them. As they neared the outskirts of the settlers' camp, Jake could feel the tension building. He had never imagined himself in such a position, standing alongside these warriors, ready to protect something so much larger than himself. The camp ahead was quiet, too quiet, and as they drew nearer, Jake noticed the subtle signs of an ambush. The settlers had prepared for the confrontation, but the Apache were ready. They had the advantage of the land, the element of surprise, and the strength of their unity. As the warriors dismounted, Jake joined them, his heart pounding in his chest. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The time for words had passed. Iana motioned for him to follow as she moved to the front of the group. She led them silently toward the edge of the camp, her movements smooth and calculated. Jake followed her, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. He wasn't a soldier, but he knew how to fight when necessary. The air was thick with tension as the warriors took their positions. The first movement came from the settlers' camp, a flash of movement, a horse galloping toward them. Iana's voice rang out sharply, a command to move. The Apache warriors responded immediately, shifting into position with a precision that spoke of years of practice. Jake followed their lead, moving swiftly through the underbrush. The silence was deafening as they approached the camp. Then, the sound of voices, shouts, echoed from the settlers. The Apache had been spotted. The air crackled with tension as the first shots rang out. Jake's heart pounded, but he kept his focus, moving with the others. The battle that followed wasn't about destruction. It wasn't about proving superiority. It was about survival, about protecting a way of life. Jake understood that now. He wasn't just fighting for a cause anymore. He was fighting for something much deeper, something he had never fully understood until now. As the battle raged on, Jake found himself standing beside Iana, their eyes meeting in a shared understanding. This was their fight together. As the last of the settlers were driven back, the Apache warriors stood victorious. The land had been protected, but at what cost? Jake knew that this was only the beginning. There was more to be done, more to protect. But for the first time in his life, he felt a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. Iana turned to him, her expression one of quiet determination. "We've won today," she said softly. "But the fight isn't over. There will always be more to fight for." Jake nodded, his heart filled with both pride and a deep, unspoken understanding. This wasn't just a battle. This was a way of life, and he was now a part of it. Days passed after the battle, and the Apache camp settled into a new kind of quiet. The victory had been hard-won, but the lingering uncertainty of the future still weighed heavily on Jake Thompson's heart. As he sat by the fire one evening, watching the flames flicker and dance in the night's cool air, he found himself thinking about everything he had left behind. His ranch, his solitude, it all felt so distant now. He was no longer just a cowboy working the land. He was part of something larger, something that had opened his eyes to a world he had never known. Iana sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the last light of the day was fading. The silence between them was comfortable, as if words were no longer necessary. They had shared a bond. Forged through struggle and survival, a bond that had deepened with each passing day. "Do you ever wonder," Jake asked quietly, "what would have happened if I hadn't been there that night? If I hadn't helped you?" Iana's eyes flickered to him, her expression soft but unreadable. "You were meant to be there," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Everything happens for a reason. You came into our lives when we needed you most." Jake nodded, though a part of him still couldn't fully believe it. How could he, a man who had lived a life of isolation, now be woven into the fabric of the Apache tribe? It didn't make sense. But every day he spent with them, learning their ways and understanding their struggles, made him feel more like he belonged. As the days turned into weeks, Jake continued to help the Apache in whatever way he could. He became familiar with the land, the rhythms of nature, and the ways the tribe had lived for centuries. It was a hard, demanding life, but one that Jake found deeply fulfilling. He had never known peace like this before, the kind of peace that came not from solitude but from being part of a community that depended on each other. One evening, as Jake and Iana sat outside the camp, Watching the stars appear one by one, she spoke again. "You've come a long way, Jake," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "You've learned more than I could have hoped for." Jake turned to her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you've shown what it means to truly fight for something greater than yourself," Ayanna said, her eyes locking with his. "You've become a protector of this land, of our people." Jake's chest tightened. He had never thought of himself as a protector. He had always been just a man trying to survive. But now, he understood that survival meant more than just living. It meant fighting for those you cared about, standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. As the days passed, the peace they had fought for seemed to hold, but Jake knew it wouldn't last forever. The settlers were still out there, and sooner or later they would come again. The question was not if, but when. And when that time came, Jake would be ready. He had found a new purpose in this fight, and he knew that he couldn't walk away from it now. He had become part of something that went beyond any battle. It was about survival, yes, but it was also about a future, about a legacy that would live on long after the storms had passed. One evening, as the sun set and the camp began to quiet, Ayanna turned to Jake once more. "You have a place here," she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength. "You are one of us now." Jake looked at her, his heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something he hadn't fully recognized until that moment. He had come into this world by accident, but now, he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. And as he looked out over the land, he realized that no matter what the future held, he would face it with the Apache by his side, ready to defend the life they had fought to protect. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The days continued to pass in a quiet rhythm, the kind of peace that had become a distant memory for Jake Thompson. He had long ago accepted that life in the Apache camp was no longer a temporary chapter, but now, there was something unsettling in the air. The settlers had been quiet for a while, but Jake knew better than to trust the calm. He could feel the tension building, like the stillness before a storm. Ayanna had become more distant in recent days, her face often clouded with thoughts of the future. They had won their last battle, but the war was far from over. The tribe had already begun making preparations for whatever might come next, knowing that the settlers would not stop until they had taken everything. Jake found himself becoming more deeply involved in the tribe's affairs, learning their strategies, their traditions, and their ways of survival. It was more than just fighting now. It was about protecting the land, the people, and a way of life that had been threatened for far too long. Ayanna had taught him that there was a connection to the land that went beyond the physical. It was a connection rooted in the spirit of the people, in their history, and in the generations that had come before them. As the days grew shorter and the nights longer, Jake began to understand what it truly meant to protect something. It was more than just a physical fight. It was a fight to keep the soul of the land intact, to honor the spirits of those who had come before. One evening, as the fire crackled in the center of the camp, Ayanna approached Jake. He could see the weight of the world in her eyes, the same world he had come to understand and respect. She stood beside him, her expression unreadable. "Jake," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of struggle. "We have come to a point where we can no longer just wait for them to come to us." Jake turned to her, his heart tightening. He knew what she was saying. "We can't keep running, hiding in the shadows," she continued. "We must face this head-on, with everything we have. We must make our stand." Jake knew that the time for passive resistance had passed. The settlers wouldn't stop until they had forced the Apache from their land, and the tribe had no choice but to fight for what was theirs. "I'll stand with you," Jake said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his heart. "I won't let you fight this alone." Ayanna's eyes softened, and for a moment, the fierce warrior who had been so guarded let her guard down, just slightly. "I know," she said. "And that means more than you'll ever understand." The camp was alive with activity in the days that followed, the warriors preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Jake had seen battle before, but this was different. This was not just a fight for survival. This was a fight to protect the very soul of a people and their land. As the final day of preparation dawned, Jake found himself standing beside Iona once again, the weight of the moment settling in. The sky above was clear, the air crisp, and the land stretched out before them in all its wild beauty. It was a land that had been fought for by countless generations, and it would not be taken without a fight. "Are you ready?" Iona asked, her voice steady, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, a rare moment of vulnerability. Jake took a deep breath, the weight of everything they were about to face pressing down on him. "I'm ready," he said, his words solid, unwavering. "Let's do this." As they rode toward the distant horizon, the tribe behind them, Jake knew that this battle would define them. It was no longer just about survival. It was about honoring the past, the present, and the future. Whatever happened next, he would stand with Iona, with the Apache people, and with the land that had become his home. Together, they would fight for a future that could never be taken away. The day of the confrontation arrived, and Jake Thompson felt the weight of the world on his shoulders as he rode alongside Iona. The air was thick with tension, the kind of quiet that settles before a storm. The warriors of the Apache tribe rode with purpose, their faces set in grim determination, their movements swift and calculated. There was no turning back now. The time for waiting, for preparing, had passed. Now, they would face the settlers head-on. As Jake looked around at the faces of the men and women riding beside him, he saw strength, unity, and resolve. These were people who had fought for their land, their families, and their way of life for generations. They had lost much, but they had not lost hope. Iona, ever the leader, rode at the front, her posture straight, her eyes scanning the horizon. She was the embodiment of the Apache spirit, fierce, unyielding, and unwavering in her commitment to protect her people. Jake couldn't help but admire her. In the short time he had known her, she had shown him a world he never thought possible, a world where honor and duty were more important than anything else. "Stay close," Iona said, her voice carrying over the wind. Jake nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. They had trained for this moment, but nothing could fully prepare him for what lay ahead. The sounds of horses' hooves echoed in the distance, and Jake knew that the settlers were near. He felt the familiar knot of fear in his stomach, but it was tempered with a sense of resolve. They had to win. They had no choice. As they neared the outskirts of the settlers' camp, Jake felt a shift in the air. The settlers were ready, but the Apache had the advantage of surprise. Iona motioned for the warriors to spread out, and Jake followed her lead, staying close but moving with the stealth that had been drilled into him during his training. The land they were on was familiar to Jake now. He had learned its rhythms, its patterns, its secrets. He could feel the pulse of the earth beneath him as he rode, the connection between the land and the people who had lived here for centuries. It was a feeling he had never experienced before, a feeling that made him realize just how deeply connected the Apache were to this place. As they crept closer to the camp, Jake's breath caught in his throat. The settlers were waiting, their figures silhouetted against the setting sun. He could see their outlines, their guns at the ready, their faces tense with anticipation. The confrontation was inevitable. They had arrived. Iona raised her hand, signaling for the warriors to halt. The silence was deafening as they waited, poised for action. Jake felt his heart beating faster, his hands tightening around the reins of his horse. This was it. The moment they had all been preparing for. As the first shot rang out, the warriors surged forward, moving with the speed and precision of a single unit. Jake followed, his heart racing, his focus sharp. The battle was swift, but it was clear that the Apache had the upper hand. The settlers, caught off guard, struggled to keep their footing as the Apache moved through the camp, their strategy flawless. Jake fought alongside the warriors, his mind focused on the task at hand. He wasn't a soldier, but he had learned quickly how to protect the people he had come to care for. His every movement was instinctual now, a combination of the training he had received and the connection he felt to the land and its people. As the dust began to settle and the sounds of the battle faded, Jake looked around. The settlers had retreated, and the Apache had once again defended their land. It had been a hard-fought victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. Iona rode up beside him, her face unreadable, but there was a sense of relief in her eyes. "We did it," Jake said, his voice hoarse from the exertion. Iona nodded, her gaze shifting to the horizon. "This battle is won, but the war is not over," she said softly. "There will be more challenges ahead. But today, we have protected our people. Today, we have honored our ancestors." Jake nodded, his heart swelling with pride. He had come a long way from the lonely cowboy he had once been. Now, he was part of something much greater, a cause, a people, a legacy. As the warriors returned to the camp, Jake realized that his journey was far from over. He had found a new family in the Apache, and he would stand by them, no matter what came next. The future was uncertain, but Jake knew one thing for sure: he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, with Iona and the Apache people by his side.